Hey, Flawed Guy here. Hope you enjoyed the last video. Um, we talked about Medo Persia being the second beast in the book of Daniel, chapter 7. We're going to go over the third beast today, Greece, and just want to give you a little background about what the Bible says about Greece. And just hopefully it helps you guys understand a little bit what this ultimately is all leading up to is, a future kingdom under Antichrist, which we'll learn about, which, I believe is, getting ready to be revealed possibly in our lifetimes. So it's good to kind of know these things and have a good grasp of what they all mean. Um, so last video we talked about Medo Persia. So I try to go give a little bit of a recap on what we were talking about before we get into what we're going to talk about today. So I'm just going to go back to Daniel chapter 2, which we've already discussed. If you haven't seen those videos, look back at the videos we did about Daniel and Babylon being the first beast. Check out those videos if you haven't seen those yet. It'll give you a better understanding of what we're doing today. So without further ado on that, I'll just go back to Daniel chapter 2 and read from there. Of course, we were talking about how Nebuchadnezzar had this dream. We've shown you that in the previous videos. He had a dream about this statue in the shape and form of a man. It was made out of various metals, the metals representing kingdoms in succession, one to another. I'll start with that particular image as talked about in Daniel chapter 2. We'll start with chapter 38 just to give us another little refresher about that, because I like to compare that image in the dream of chapter 2 with the images and imagery we're seeing in chapter 7 and chapters after that, so we kind of know what we're talking about. So let's go back. If you go in your Bibles, look at Daniel chapter 2, starting at verse 38, and I'll read. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven hath he given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold. So we know that that was referring to King Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire. That particular metal of gold in that image was representative of the Babylonian Empire. Next verse, 39. And after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee. And we know that that was referred to as the breast and arms of silver in this dream. The arms representing the Medes and the Persians. Another interesting note, we talked about the dual nature of that kingdom, one being stronger than the other. Another thing I also thought of with arms is usually, you're right-handed or left-handed, right arm, left arm. One of your, appendages or whatever, is you're stronger. And so I just thought that was kind of neat too. God knows what he's doing. If you're right-handed, your right arm is stronger than your left. It stands to reason in reference to Medo Persia. Persia was stronger than the Median aspect of that empire. And so I just think that's kind of a neat thing to think about. We also learned that in Daniel chapter 7, that second beast that looked like a bear raised itself up on one side was representative of Medo Persia. So go back and check that video out to get a refresher on that. And so what we want to talk about is to continue on in chapter 39. It says, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. So I think that's interesting as well. The interesting thing there is that it's speaking of this particular kingdom, bearing rule over all the earth. So I just want to go over that, and so we'll just jump over quickly to Daniel chapter 7 with the beast imagery, and we'll just give a little recap on that as well to get to where we're at today. Chapter 7, I'll go back and start again with Nebuchadnezzar and the head of gold. And we go back and talk about these beasts and succession. Obviously, those kingdoms, um, you know, the Babylonian Empire was before the Medo Persian Empire, which was before the Greek Empire. So those succeeded one after each other. So it shows you there's a chronology in time, over hundreds of years, over the lifetimes of those empires. There was a succession there. And in chapter 7, just to recap, um, I'll start at verse 4, Daniel chapter 7. The first beast was like a lion. It had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked. It was lifted up from the earth and made to stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. We discussed that in Babylon as the first beast. That represents the kingdom of Babylon, or the Babylonian Empire, excuse me. It says in verse 5, and behold, another beast, a second, like a bear, and raised itself up on one side. It had 3 ribs in the mouth of it between the teeth of it, and they said thus unto it, arise, devour much flesh. Again, if you're comparing this to the statue of the various metals, um, this second beast, like a bear, would be Medo Persia, um, which would be the arms, of silver and whatnot, and it raising itself up on one side. We talked about that being just like the Persian side of the empire was stronger than the Medes after a while, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it between the teeth of it, represented. We talked about how the Medo-Persian Empire had basically swallowed up the kingdoms of Lydia, which is basically like modern day Turkey, the kingdoms of Egypt, and Neo-Babylonia. So that would be the 3 ribs. And what I thought was interesting about ribs is, if you think back with Adam and Eve, how Eve was taken from Adam's rib, from his side. You hear studies about how, you know, your the female was to be the companion and helpmeet of Adam, and he came from the side. And I just think it's kind of interesting that it was 3 ribs, and so if you look to the side of the Medo-Persian Empire, not really north or south of it, but next to it, it swallowed up those kingdoms in the vicinity of Turkey and Egypt and Babylonia. But, just something to think about, 3 ribs. Also, it said to the bear beast, devour much flesh. We talked about that being, the cruelty and the non-pity of the Medo-Persians and their conquests. You know, warfare of any kind back in those days and times was brutal, and they conquered a lot of swaths of geographical area, and so that's representative of the saying unto the beast, arise, devour much flesh. So finally, we get to verse 6 in Daniel chapter 7. But first, let's flip back to Daniel chapter 2 just to read about, again, to reiterate, Daniel chapter 2 with the statue of the image of the human form and the various metals that made it up. It said, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. I told you to kind of take note of bearing rule over all the earth. We skip over to chapter 7, and we'll read that about that particular kingdom. It says, I beheld, and lo, another beast, like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given unto it. So we're going to concentrate on verse 6 for today. If you notice that it says dominion was given to it, and we were talking about chapter 2 and how it said of that kingdom, which was represented by the metallic brass in chapter 2 of the statue, It says, shall bear rule over all the earth. And in chapter 7 of Daniel, it's talking about dominion being given unto it. So I do believe, again, these are one and the same. It's just God using the symbology and the comparison of the Greek Empire to this leopard type beast in verse 6. And that's what we're going to hopefully go over today. I wanted to go over chapter 8 a little bit because in Daniel chapter 8, there's some interesting things, especially, let's see, 8 verse 21. We'll skip over to Daniel 8 verses 21 real quick. And in previous to verse 21, is talking about this ram with two horns and a goat, and they're basically, fighting with one another. And at verse 21, it explains that the rough goat is the king of Grecia or Greece, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Okay, so we can study this more in detail, but basically, this is telling you that the goat is representative of the kingdom of Greece, and that this horn that was between the goat's eyes is representative of the king of that empire, if you will. And we know that to be Alexander the Great in antiquity. So if we go and read about chapter 8, I would like to expound upon that and just read up to what we just said, verse 21. It says, in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me, Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first. I saw in a vision, and it came to pass, when I saw, that I was at Shushan in the palace, which is the province of Elam. And I saw in a vision, and I was by the river Ulai. Then I lifted up mine eyes, and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had 2 horns. The 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast could stand before him. Neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. So we find out that that ram with the 2 horns is basically the bear in chapter 7, raised up on one side, lifted up higher than the other, the Persian side being stronger than the Medes, and more power towards the end of the kingdom when the Persian kings ruled it. It was the same as the 2 arms in the previous dream of chapter 2. And here in chapter 8, the 2 horns, representing kingdoms on the ram, is the Medes and the Persians, and we'll go on to read about it. It says, and as I was considering, continuing in verse 5, chapter 8, behold, a he-goat came from the west. Now, a lot of times you've heard, especially me growing up, I'm in my 50s, and you hear about Western culture, Western civilization, what we gain from the Greco-Roman history and all that kind of stuff. And we realize that Greece was west of the Medo-Persian Empire. Okay, and so I'm just going to read a little bit of commentary here on the he-goat coming from the west, on the face of the whole earth, and touch not the ground. And the he-goat, or the goat, had a notable horn between his eyes. So it says the acknowledged symbol of Greece is a goat. It says Caranus, the first king, going with many Greeks to seek a new habitation in Macedonia, was advised by an oracle to take goats for guides. Seeing a herd fleeing from a storm, he followed them to Edessa, and there built the seat of his empire. He called the place Aegea, the goat's town, and the people Aegiadae, the goat's people, names derived from Aigos, goat. He chose a goat as the emblem of his standards, and Aegea was the burying place of Macedonian kings. Alexander called his son by Roxana Alexander Agus, Alexander the Goat. Now, that's something you guys who are history buffs, whatever, can look up and get into if you'd like. But I thought that was pretty interesting. And here in the Bible, we're talking about this he goat coming from the west, okay, Greece and Macedonia, on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes, which we find out is Alexander the Great. So let's continue reading. And he came to the ram that had two horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran into him with the fury of his power. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him. Okay, so what's interesting is it's talking about this goat not touching the ground, and he had this notable horn, and it just kind of the goat not touching the ground. This commentary basically says the swiftness of Alexander's conquests, which really does make sense to me. It says in 13 years he conquered the whole known world. Now we're not talking about South America and regions of the globe. We're talking about these areas basically centering around the Middle East and Israel, because that's what the Bible centers around. Okay, so that makes sense. So it says, I saw him come close to the ram. He was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram, and broke his two horns. And there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and stamped upon him. And there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Okay. And it says, therefore, the he goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken. Now, what's interesting is Alexander the Great, if he's, which I believe is true, he's this horn on this goat. He basically conquers the kingdom of Medo Persia, which are the two horns on the ram. And this goat, basically stomps and tramples on this ram, takes it over, conquers it. Okay, that's talking about Alexander's tremendous conquests. And according to this commentary, is 13 years or whatever. Very quick, swift, brilliant, tactical, militaristic campaign. There's no doubt about that. But it says here, when the he goat waxed very great, or Alexander, when he was strong, the horn was broken. So we all know from history that Alexander the Great died at the age of 33 years old. Um, and it says, for the horn, instead of the horn, I guess, it's saying, for the horn came up four notable ones towards the four winds of heaven. Okay. And we know that four kingdoms came from Alexander's empire when he died. The generals and stuff were all vying for power. And so the kingdom was divided basically, and four notable areas of power sprang up out of what Alexander had done. And if you were to look in history, you would find out that basically those four generals, one controlled the area, basically what would be modern day Turkey. The other one, like Ptolemy, would have controlled the southern area of what is modern day Egypt. And then another one controlled, parts of what would be Assyria or Syria and the, Babylonian sector. And the other general controlled Greece. So basically, Greece, Turkey, Syria, and Egypt, controlled by these four generals under Alexander, after he died, took over and were vying for power of the kingdom. Okay, so again, in verse 9, continuing, it says, out of them came forth a little horn, which waxed great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the pleasant land. Now we'll know that this is in reference to a future antichrist, which we'll get into in the subsequent study when we get to those other kingdoms and that the other beasts we're talking about, we're going to study. But for now, let's just stop here about what actually happened as far as ancient empires and not get into the future empire of the Antichrist yet. But so we understand that basically Alexander's empire was divided up basically into four kingdoms, if you will, and they were all vying for power um, after his death. And so you understand that as it continues on, it says in verse 20, the ram which you saw having two horns, it tells you plainly in the Bible in verse 20, are the kings of Media and Persia. So there's no having to discuss whether that's, what it meant or not. The rough goat is the king of Grecia, which is Alexander. And the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king, meaning Alexander the Great in antiquity was the leader and the greatest leader, if you will, great militaristic tactician back then who, you know, gained such a swath of, an empire, and dominion was given to him, like we talked about in the other verse. Uh, and he was the first king. So what we're saying is basically in the later times, okay, it says also, now that being broken, being Alexander's death, whereas four stood up for it, four kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation or out of the empire of the Grecian Empire, but not in his power. Okay, not in the power of this first king listed in verse 21, Alexander. But here's what's interesting. In the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark senses shall stand up. And what's interesting about that is it says in the latter time of their kingdom. I want you to just think about that. Think about Alexander the Great. He's dead and gone. And you can look into the history about the four kings that were, you know, how his empire was divided up and stuff. And that's a neat thing to kind of get into, especially if you like history and ancient history and stuff. But it mentions in the latter time of their kingdom. And that's what I'm talking about, this future kingdoms that are coming on this earth. The Bible is basically saying it's going to be, in my view and study of this, which we'll get into, it's mainly going to be Greek in nature. Just go look at all the countries and all the lands that were encompassed by the Greek Empire. It says in the latter time of their kingdom, talking about those four kingdoms that rise up, but not in the power of Alexander. Okay, we hear a lot of stuff about Europe and all these different things over the years. I've heard so many different things about the antichrist and his kingdom and stuff. And that's kind of what I'm hoping to lead into with this study about these beasts in Daniel, is to expound a little bit more about what all this means and where it really could be coming from. And I think you'll be really excited when we get into the fourth beast and the other beast after Greece, Rome, and what the 10 toes and all that represents in this future latter times of these kingdoms is really, kind of interesting. But for now, let's just go to a few other verses about the Greeks in the Bible. We can go to Joel. So I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'm going to go to my eSword and go to the book of Joel and just click on that quickly. And I'm going to go to chapter 3, verse 6. Okay, just remember we were talking about the latter times of the kingdom of Greece. And let's go to Joel 3, verse 6. I'm going to move down to that. And it says, the children also of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have ye sold unto the Grecians, that you might remove them far from their border. That's just kind of something we can get into later. When we're talking about these future empires that are coming on the world. Just another verse in Zechariah. Let's go down to Zechariah 9:13. Okay. Let's see here. Zechariah. Okay, here we go. Verse 13 in Zechariah says, when I have bent Judah for me, filled the bow with Ephraim, and raised up thy sons, O Zion, against thy sons, O Greece, and made thee as the sword of a mighty man. We'll get into these verses a little bit more then. But what I believe those verses are alluding to is a future empire, um, that if you look at modern day countries, all these different countries today didn't exist back then. It was different areas of the world were called different things back then, but it was basically the same geographical boundaries, as the Greek Empire. And if you look at the modern countries that are in those boundaries, you see that a lot of that is like Afghanistan and Iran, Syria, Greece, Turkey, parts of Egypt. It's mostly, centering around the Middle East, all the way to basically the Indus River, near India. You got Pakistan, maybe Kazakhstan, or one of those other countries up there. And I think that's very interesting. And it's basically talking about the Greeks and their relationship with Israel. And I just wanted you to make note of that. We're talking about Alexander in Daniel, but also it's also talking about in the latter time of their kingdom. And that's what I hope to go into later. We'll delve more into that. That these verses are dealing with something that is Greek in nature, if you will, and in their dealings with, you know, Israel and countries that could be part of a future Greek empire, if you will, and their dealings with Israel and Israel with them in the yet future. One other thing I kind of wanted to go into, just to kind of give you a little teaser about that stuff as well, is to go to Revelation, and we'll go to chapter 13. Okay. And let's just read about something here. It says, Revelation 13, verse 1, starting at verse 1. I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up. Here we go again with a beast rising up out of the sea, having the 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. Now, what I thought was interesting there, that is about a future kingdom uh, that basically will be governed and, controlled by Antichrist at some point. He will be this world leader will be similar to Alexander in that he will be a great military leader. He will go about conquering swiftly many countries. Many countries will just submit to him. Others he will conquer swiftly, just like Alexander the Great. It is my opinion that he will probably be around the same age as Alexander the Great, maybe in his 30s when all this is going down. I'll expound on that later, but I'll give you my thoughts on that in a few moments. But what's interesting here in Revelation is it talks about this beast being like a leopard. Again, we just read in Daniel chapter 7 about the Greek Empire, okay? And it was the beast that succeeded the bear. And it says, behold, another beast like a leopard had on the back of it the 4 wings of a fowl. Now, just keep that in mind, the 4 wings for a moment, okay? But if you look at this beast in Revelation, this is the Greek in nature situation I wanted you to think about in the yet future. This beast in the future under Antichrist, not under Alexander, but a future Alexander, if you will. Let's call this Alexander Antichrist, future Alexander Antichrist. He is in control of this beast, which was like a leopard. Now, it's described mostly as a leopard. Most of it, the majority of its body, if you will, is like a leopard. But then it goes on to say, and his feet were like the feet of a bear. What I think is interesting to note about that is it shows me that if we go back to that beast that we're talking about in Daniel 7, chapter 6, another beast like a leopard, okay, that's referring to the Greek Empire there, okay? That's the belly and thighs of brass or whatever was in the metallic image that we saw in chapter 2 that would succeed the Medo-Persians, okay? We read in chapter 8 of Daniel about how the ram with 2 horns was Media and Persia, and how this great king would come and conquer them swiftly and quickly, and that was Alexander the Great. But in the latter time of that kingdom, there'd be another Alexander, if you will, this future antichrist, who gains control of this kingdom we're talking about in Revelation 13. And most of it is described as a leopard. Okay, but it's not just a leopard. This is what I think is interesting. It's mostly Greek in nature because it is referred to as a leopard. But then it has the feet of a bear, which we knew was Medo Persia. It was swallowed up by Alexander the Great. So again, these countries, modern day countries, if you look at the Greek Empire and what Alexander did, he conquered Medo Persia. Well, that would be the bear, you know, and that would be the bear's feet, right? So it's got elements of the bear in it. Okay. If this leopard type empire in the latter times of that kingdom, it's obviously got the elements of the Medes and Persians in it because it's got bear in it. If you follow along with the beast we're talking about in the book of Daniel. And then it says it has the mouth of a lion. Okay, we go back to Daniel and we look at the first beast. It says the first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. We talked about that being Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon. So this future kingdom has elements of the Greek, Medo-Persian, and Babylonian empires. And all of those empires got swallowed up by the Greek Empire at that point, okay, that we talked about. So it stands to reason that since Babylon, which was like modern day Iraq, let's say, was swallowed up by the Medes and Persians, which would be like modern day Iran and other countries in that area, and then the Greeks took them over, okay, that this empire, if you will, by Alexander and everything within the geographical confines of its outer boundaries, you realize that elements would be of the lion, Babylon, the bear, Medo Persia, and the leopard, Greece, and all the other dominions that it took over. Dominion was given unto it. Remember, it says dominion was given unto it. Daniel 7, chapter 6. Daniel chapter 7, verse 6. So I think, and it's what's interesting is it says the dragon gave him his power and his seat and his great authority. So we know that the kingdoms of this world basically are under the pseudo rulership of Satan. Satan is referred to as the dragon, and that these world empires are basically under the sway and control of spiritual beings, which translates basically into the natural realm on earth under Satan and the way he does things, the way he operates. And this future kingdom under Antichrist, who opposes God and exalts himself above God and basically calls himself God, is given his power by Satan himself. I also think it's probably very interesting that, Satan always counterfeits what God has. And a lot of times you've heard in Christian circles, maybe those of you know what I'm talking about, that there's an unholy trinity. Basically, Satan is, they like God the Father, Jesus, and Satan's trinity would be the Antichrist. And the one who basically glorifies Jesus is the Holy Spirit. But in Antichrist trinity, it would be the false prophet. And what I think is interesting, and just something to think about, this isn't in the Bible, something you can prove. But if Alexander was 33 years old, which I think is very interesting, it is believed that Jesus, after he died, before he rose again in the earthly vessel he was in, was 33 years old. I think it's very interesting. The devil wants to counterfeit through his antichrist, an evil ministry. And the Bible talks about the latter times of a kingdom compared to an Alexander the Great, that a future evil leader would arise. And isn't it something how Alexander died at the same age as Jesus did? And then in the yet future time of a mostly Greek in nature kingdom, this Antichrist comes to power and bear rule over dominion over parts of the globe. And wouldn't it be kind of interesting if he was around 30, 33 years old, just like to counterfeit Jesus with this wicked antichrist, if he was around the same age as Jesus, 33, when he's destroyed by God himself? Just something to think about, something I've thought about. I think it's very interesting. But so I just wanted to kind of get into that with you a little bit. Um, we can go on and read a little bit farther into that, but um, we'll go over the latter time of the Greek kingdom that was spoken about in the book of Daniel later. But for now, we're just concentrating on that third beast being Greece. So let's go back to chapter 7, verse 6. I beheld another like a leopard. Okay. What's interesting about leopards is they're pound for pound like the strongest, most agile of the big cats. Um, tigers and lions are very powerful cats, but as far as being able to lift, you know, uh, their kill up into trees and stuff, lions and them can't do that, but the leopard can. So pound for pound, you can look into this. The leopard is like the all around most agile and strongest of the big cats, which is fitting for the Greek Empire, and it's being told that dominion was given unto it. Another interesting thing is um, upon the back of it were four wings of a fowl. Now, if you remember in the prior verses about the first beast that had the lion and it had eagle's wings, we talked about that being Nebuchadnezzar and gave references to that point to back that up. What's interesting in here is it just says it's a leopard and has four wings of a fowl. It doesn't say of an eagle or of a hawk or of a swift bird like a kite or something like that. But it's talking like, the wings of a fowl. Now, it could mean that since there's an extra set of wings on there, that it's like double the swiftness of Nebuchadnezzar's conquest, as this commentary here. I will read. It says, the leopard is a fit symbol of the Grecian Empire founded by Alexander the Great. The leopard is known for its swiftness. Together with the four wings of a fowl, it symbolizes the swiftness of Alexander's conquests. Previously, the two wings of the lion symbolized swiftness, but here, the four wings symbolize double swiftness of Alexander over Nebuchadnezzar's conquests. None of the conquests of the other beasts equal those of Alexander. Okay? And, I think that's probably true there. And another thing that's interesting is um, it says the beast also had four heads. Okay, and remember, if we go to chapter 8 again, where we were talking about that goat and how that was representative of Greece, and we went to chapter 21, says the rough goat is the kingdom of Grecia. Okay, under Alexander, the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king, Alexander. Now that king being broken, or when he died, whereas four stood up for it, four kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. Okay, so just flip back to chapter 7. Okay, it had four wings of a fowl and had four heads. So I just believe those are basically synonymous with the four kingdoms or divisions after Alexander's death. The goat, the horn that was broken, four other ones rose up to basically, take control of the empire as four generals. Those divisions in Greece, Turkey, Syria, and Egypt. And again, that kind of backs up and goes along with um, this beast in Daniel chapter 7, being like a leopard and having four wings of a fowl and four heads, and dominion being given unto it. Again, those wings they're not eagle's wings. It just says wings of a fowl. And we know that Nebuchadnezzar was this great king and conquered and stuff. And he's described, we talked about the eagle's wings and stuff. What's interesting here is in chapter 8, talking about four kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. So they were, strong generals, but they weren't as great as Alexander the Great in and of himself. And so I believe those four wings are like, in the four heads are like the four divisions of the Greek Empire. They weren't, as, strong as Alexander. Therefore, they're just the wings of a fowl, not like this great individual leader, like the one set of wings being Nebuchadnezzar, one person. But these are four wings of a fowl. They're strong, but they're not the one leader whose domain and who had control over the whole empire. Okay, they're having to duke it out after the death of Alexander. And so that's basically it as far as the Greek Empire there. Again, just go back and refresh, go from chapter 2, read about the kingdoms in succession. There is a chronology there, kingdoms succeeding one another. We see in history with the kingdoms of Babylon was succeeded by the Medes and the Persians, and then they were taken over by the Greeks. And that's where we're at in our study so far. You go to chapter 7, you see a beast that was a lion. That's Nebuchadnezzar with the eagle's wings. We talked about it. Then you see the bear with the three ribs, which is Medo-Persia and that empire taking over the countries of Lydia, Egypt, and Babylon. Those are the three ribs in the bear's mouth, and so on and so forth. And then you get into the kingdom of brass. That's the beast which looks like this leopard. It has the four wings of a fowl and four heads. The conquests of Alexander the Great were very swift and very quick, but after he died, his four generals basically divided up the kingdom and were vying for power after that. And that's basically where we're at in Daniel chapter 7 after this image of this third beast. Go ahead and read all that, study up on it and follow up in chapter 8 and get a little more idea of, what was going on with the Greek Empire. Just knowing that in the future, there's a latter time of that kingdom. We'll get into that, which is kind of exciting. And then we're going to study and go over next. We're going to talk about the fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, strong exceedingly, having iron teeth. That's Daniel chapter 7, verse 7. We're going to go into a little bit about, the Roman Empire succeeding the Greek Empire and some interesting things there that we have to talk about. Those would be the legs of iron, basically, in Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel chapter 2. So what we're doing is just study chapter 2, chapter 7, and then we'll talk about, and compare how those kingdoms. The same thing as the beast in Daniel chapter 7. And then finally, hopefully, we'll get into a study on future Antichrist kingdom and how that arises or could arise and how that relates to possibly countries in modern times that we're living in. And, ultimately, this is about looking at what's going on in our world, what's going on in our lives, and realizing that if this is indeed true and that the Antichrist is about to appear on the world stage, the whole point of these videos is to get people to think and to get people to talk about God and to, study the Bible. And if the Antichrist is coming, that means God's coming back for the church. The world's going to see people just disappear by the millions or, whatever that number is. And the explanation, who knows what it's going to be. The world, Satan, the counterfeit always has some counterfeit answer for what God says it is. Is it going to be aliens taking us off the planet, interdimensional beings? Kind of like that movie with the Avengers where all these people disappeared, with the Infinity Stones and stuff. It's getting in people's minds. It's trying to get into psyche of the people on this planet that there's an explanation other than what God said. So this is to provoke people to thought. Are you going to heaven? Are you going to make it? Are you going to escape judgment that's on the world and this country? And if we reject God, if we don't believe in Him, and not just believe, but accept Him as our Savior, we have to do that. We have to admit that we're flawed. I'm flawed. I'm a sinner. It's nothing I do. I can only do what anything would be considered good and kind and decent is because of God. And I have the capacity to do evil things. And I'm just thankful for His mercy. And so please think about that. Any of you who aren't Christians, find a good church, look in the Bible and pray and cry out to God and ask Him to forgive you of sin. And all that is basically we can't be perfect like God because we're flawed creatures. We're flawed beings. Just try to be good for 10 minutes, an hour, a week. Try not to yell at your coworkers. Try not to yell at your kid, yell at yourself. All the evil going on in the world. We can't. We can't do it except through the grace of God. And so I'm thankful to Him for that. I pray that you will think about these things in relation to this study. And ultimately, it's about giving your heart to Jesus Christ. And He'll allow you to be in His family and live forever, forever and ever. And be able to escape all this crud that's in the world that's just terrible and depressing and sad. One day that'll be put to an end. And God will come back as the judge and a merciful Savior as well. But He's going to rule this world, and we have to know that we're in His family and we're doing things the way He wants us to do it. And we have to start by admitting we're flawed and sinful and don't do things the way God would want us to do, things that are good and decent. We can't, even if we wanted to, all the time. And that's by putting trust in Him, a being God who came in the shape of a human being to be able to relate to us so that we could relate to Him and He could understand what we're going through. And we could say, God, forgive me for this rotten things that I do. Forgive me of that. And if we say that to Him, He will. And He'll take us to heaven because we put our faith in Jesus Christ. He's the only one that you can put your faith in that will allow you to live eternally. There's only one name under heaven given among men whereby we must be saved, and that's Jesus Christ. That's what I need to say, and that's what these videos are really all about. Everything in the Bible should lead us to that point. And if you haven't thought about that, think about it before it's too late, before this Antichrist appears and the world sees this Alexander appear, this young 30-something-year-old, in my opinion, person who brings world peace. And yet in his heart, he's going to plunge the world into darkness and death and destruction and war. Something to think about while we're studying this stuff. And just get into the Bible and study it and ask God to help you. Even if it seems like you don't think He's there, He is. I felt the same way many times, but He's there. He's never lied to me. And after the fact, I've seen what He was doing. But some things we may not know until we get to see Him and can ask Him. But until then, it's a life of faith. It's a marathon. It's a race. We've got to keep going and encourage each other to keep going. So that's my prayer for you guys. Please comment, share, and, if you like these videos, let me know. It helps me to understand. And, I just pray I can keep doing them and that it matters. So thanks again for watching, and please share and tell others about them. And I thank you. Have a good day.